My boyfriend's closest friend mocked me as stupid and too unsophisticated for him. So, I flipped the script and destroyed her PhD career in just 1 week. You know, there are moments in life that hit you so hard, they redefine everything. For me, it was when the man I loved, the man I'd built a life with, looked me in the eye and essentially told me I wasn't smart enough for him because someone else whispered it in his ear. Can you imagine that? And when that betrayal happened, the fury it ignited in me, well, it ended up utterly destroying the person who started it all. Her career. Gone. In 1 week. Ethan and I, we had something special. 3 years, comfortable, easy. We met at a game night, both aerospace engineers. We loved hiking, movies. I was immersed in a research lab, designing satellite components, while he consulted for aviation firms. Our days were a rhythm, cooking together, dissecting work challenges, just soaking in each other's thoughts. It was good. Then Olivia came back into his life. His high school classmate, now pursuing a PhD in theoretical physics. She started showing up to our hangouts, weaving herself into our world. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I genuinely asked her about quantum physics. It's fascinating. But she'd respond as if I were 5, then turn to Ethan, batting her eyelashes. Wasn't it cute how I tried to understand? Ethan would chuckle, and I'd catch her watching him. She only did it when he was looking. Dinner conversations would inevitably pivot to her studies, then she'd apologize for boring me with clever people stuff. Me, with a master's degree, mind you. The condescension ratcheted up. We went to a space exploration trivia night, my actual job. I nailed every question. Olivia, without missing a beat, told Ethan I probably just remembered information without understanding it. And he agreed. He suggested we give other teams a chance. I let it go that night, but a seed of doubt had been planted. I started noticing Ethan questioning me, things he'd never done before. When I fixed our router, he'd ask if I was sure I knew what I was doing, or just lucky. When I helped him optimize code for his project, my expertise, he'd validate it with Olivia. She'd say there were mistakes. There weren't. My blood would run cold. The breaking point hit like a physical blow. It was Ethan's workplace party. I was deep in conversation with his supervisor about propulsion systems, a topic I knew inside and out, when Olivia glided over. She introduced herself to his supervisor as Ethan's girlfriend, a lab technician. The supervisor, God bless him, thought I was the engineer who wrote the heat management study. Olivia chuckled. Oh, it must be someone else with my name, she simpered. Because the arithmetic on that paper was rather sophisticated. I corrected her, but she'd already pulled Ethan away, leaving me standing there, boiling. On the drive home, Ethan actually brought it up. He said Olivia was concerned about our compatibility. He said relationships work best when people are intellectual equals, and that I could be happy with someone on my level. On my level? I asked. What level was that? He elaborated. Olivia, he said, noticed I struggled with abstract concepts and relied too much on practical application. This woman, who barely knew me, had convinced the man I loved that I was too foolish for him. I asked Ethan if he agreed with her, and he said she'd made some reasonable observations about how our interactions were superficial. Superficial. We'd spent the last week debating the philosophical implications of sending consciousness to Mars. A switch flipped inside me. I understood exactly what was happening, but I chose to play the long game. I started appearing perplexed when Ethan explained things. I'd ask Olivia to slow down when she spoke, feigning confusion. I even bought a pile of popular science books and strategically left them lying around. Olivia, bless her oblivious heart, ate it up. They started referring to me as Ethan's nice, uncomplicated girlfriend. Meanwhile, I was working on something extraordinary. Olivia's doctoral supervisor was a Dr. Fitzgerald, a man I'd collaborated with on 5 published works. He had no idea she was even friends with Ethan. I approached him, proposing a new project incorporating quantum applications in satellite navigation. He was intrigued. We started working together. Olivia had no clue her mentor was now emailing me her research, her precious, top-secret work, to review. He thought my practical knowledge could complement her theoretical work. Here's the thing about her research. It was derivative. She'd repackaged existing frameworks with complicated math that only muddied the waters. Her code was inefficient. Her findings weren't rooted in real-world factors. I prepared a meticulous assessment, pointing out every error, every omitted citation, every instance where practical application would tear her theory apart. Dr. Fitzgerald was mortified that he'd missed it all. Then, I found something worse. Whole paragraphs, lifted directly from obscure Russian periodicals. Not enough to trigger standard plagiarism software, but enough to terminate a career. I documented everything. Every single instance. I emailed it to Dr. Fitzgerald, expressing my profound concern for academic honesty. He called me immediately. The review board convened that week. Olivia was called in, assuming it was about her upcoming defense. Instead, they showed her my findings. She tried to claim coincidence, but I had found 15 instances across 5 publications. Her funding was withdrawn. Immediately. She had 1 week to clear out her office. Ethan called me in a panic. Olivia was having a breakdown, screaming that someone had sabotaged her. She couldn't even identify who it was. She'd alienated most of the graduate students. Ethan said she needed help, asked if I could assist. Despite everything. Of course, I replied. And I brought over cookies and tea. Her office smelled of old coffee and printer toner. It was barely larger than a closet, crammed with disorganized piles of books and papers. She sat slumped over her desk, face buried in her hands, shoulders trembling. The tea sat untouched, steam curling into the stale air. I sat across from her, on a plastic chair, and watched her cry. My heart was thumping, so hard I could feel it in my throat. She kept repeating herself, asterisk, how could someone set her up? The plagiarism results were impossible. She'd never stolen anything in her life. Asterisk, I nodded, making sympathetic sounds, my hands clutching my knees under the desk. Every time she looked up at me with those red, bulging eyes, I had to fight to keep my expression worried, not victorious. This was exactly what I had planned, the culmination of weeks of meticulous preparation. But sitting there, watching her world crumble, felt different than I'd anticipated. Not horrible different, just curious. She wiped her nose and started reading the review board's conclusions again. I leaned closer, pretending to help her find a flaw, reading the document I had written myself. She asked if I noticed anything wrong with their findings. I told her they seemed quite comprehensive. Her face crumpled again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Ethan. His message. Had Olivia said anything about who could have reported her? I stared at the words, a cold chill spreading through my gut. He had no idea. He was asking his fiancée for information, while I sat across from his friend, whose career I had just ruined. I replied that she was too emotional to speak clearly, which wasn't a lie, and suggested he give her space. He sent a worried face emoji. I put down my phone. Olivia looked blankly at her screen. She wondered if Ethan would still want to be her friend after this. I assured her that of course he would. That this didn't define who she was. My words felt hollow, yet she found comfort in them. She thanked me for coming, said she didn't know what she'd do without my help. I stayed another half hour, making more tea, listening to her lament years of work, squandered. When I finally left, she hugged me at the door and told me I was a great friend. The next week was a strange haze. Ethan kept sending me updates on Olivia, how she wasn't returning his calls, his concern. He said she was proud, This must be hurting her. I agreed, saying she just needed time. On Wednesday, on his couch, he asked if he should drive over. I warned him it might make things worse, that she was probably too humiliated to face anyone from her previous life. He nodded, but kept checking his phone. By Saturday, he was constantly asking if I thought she'd be all right, if academic fraud was recoverable, if her career was truly over. I had to sit there, pretending to be equally worried, nodding, offering encouraging words, all while a strange mix of triumph and guilt churned inside me. The guilt astonished me. I expected pure satisfaction. Instead, I kept seeing her face in that tiny office, the way her hands shook. Monday morning, back at the lab, I tried to focus. Julia, my colleague, found me pouring my third coffee. "You all right?" she asked, leaning against the counter. I brushed it off, but she kept looking at me. She said I seemed different recently. More confident, but also more guarded. Like you're holding something back. I explained work had been tough. Then she asked about Ethan. And my smile, it froze. The question hit me differently now. I hadn't yet processed what all of this revealed about our relationship. Ethan had trusted Olivia over me. He'd questioned my intelligence, my skill, my fundamental understanding of my own profession. And he'd done it so easily, so quickly. 3 years of knowing me meant so little compared to Olivia's words. I realized I'd been so focused on hurting her, I hadn't really looked at why Ethan was so willing to believe I was too stupid for him. Julia was waiting for an answer. I told her things with Ethan were complicated. She offered to talk, but I declined. She squeezed my shoulder and went back to her desk. That night, Ethan arrived at my apartment with takeout. We ate on the couch, watching a deep-sea documentary. Halfway through, he stopped, looked at me with this serious expression. He'd been thinking, he said, about Olivia's comments on our intellectual compatibility. My gut dropped, but my face remained neutral. He went on, starting to question if he'd treated me unfairly. Unfair? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He squirmed, mentioned Olivia's observations about my difficulty with complex topics. Maybe they weren't true, he mumbled. Perhaps I had only been seeing what she wanted me to see. Rage swelled in my chest, a fire building. He was only questioning his actions now because Olivia had vanished. Not because he'd had some epiphany, not because he'd reflected and realized how offensive his behavior had been, but because his source of truth had disappeared. Did you really think I struggled with abstract topics? I asked. He paused, saying he hadn't realized Olivia had been persuading him. The rage grew hotter. Do you remember our conversation about consciousness and Mars exploration? He nodded. Did it seem superficial then to you, until Olivia told you it was? He looked uneasy. Confessed it hadn't. I put down my food. Stood up. Ethan asked where I was going. Nowhere, I said. I just need to move. I walked to the window, gazing down at the parking lot. The conclusion, fully formed, as if it had been waiting there all along, appeared in my mind. I turned around. I need to tell you something. He put down his food too, sat forward. And I told him, gently, calmly. I recounted how I had reviewed Olivia's research for Dr. Fitzgerald. How I'd found the plagiarism. Documented everything. How it led to her being booted out of the PhD program. The words came out steadily, clearly. I told him about the quantum navigation project, a pretense to access her work. About the plagiarized Russian documents. How I wrote the review that ended her career. How I was the one who reported her to the Academic Integrity Board. Ethan's face went absolutely white. He looked at me as if I'd just confessed to murder. The stillness between us stretched. Finally, he whispered, "Why would you do something so terrible?" His voice was low, but the astonishment was palpable. I moved back to the couch, leaving space between us. I reminded him of the router incident. How he'd questioned if I knew what I was doing, or was just lucky. I mentioned the code review, how he'd validated my work with Olivia, even though I'd been programming for longer than she had. The workplace party, where she'd called me a lab technician and laughed at the idea I'd written a technical report. The car ride home, when he said I could be happy with someone on my level. I recounted every single instance he had questioned my intelligence based on her lies. Each incident spilled out, evidence in a trial. His face grew paler with each example. When I finished, he tried to speak, but I raised a hand. What about the trivia night, Ethan? My voice was colder now. When you agreed we should give other teams a chance because I'd probably just memorize things? He closed his mouth, stared at his hands. He started to defend himself, saying Olivia was persuasive, that she had a PhD, she seemed like an intellectual authority. I cut him off. Was my master's degree not persuasive enough? Were my published research papers not authoritative enough? Was 7 years of experience in aeronautical engineering not proof enough that I understood abstract ideas? My voice rose with each question. Did you need Olivia to tell you I was brilliant, or should you have figured that out after 3 years of dating me? The pain on his face was stark now. He looked as if I'd slapped him. Good. He was finally grasping the gravity of what he'd done to us. He opened and closed his mouth, no words coming out. I waited. Finally, he admitted he didn't know what to say. Hearing everything laid out like that, it made him understand how badly he'd screwed up. It's not just that you messed up, I told him. It's how quickly you were convinced of my incompetence. How a woman you hadn't seen since high school could walk in and make you question my basic intelligence in just a few weeks. Then he asked the question that infuriated me most. Was the plagiarism real? Or did you make it up to hurt her? I had to take a deep breath. My professional integrity. He was still questioning it. I got up, walked to my laptop, opened my email, and pulled up the evidence I'd sent Dr. Fitzgerald. I showed him the original Russian papers, side by side with Olivia's work. I pointed out the similar paragraphs, the phrase patterns, the lifted formulas. 15 cases, spread across 5 publications. I showed him how she'd changed just enough words to bypass automatic detection, but retained the fundamental concepts and structures without acknowledgement. I made him read them himself, line by line. I watched his expression as he realized her deception was real, that I hadn't fabricated anything. I had just done my job as a reviewer, uncovered what was truly there. He sat back, hands over his face. He apologized, saying he never should have questioned if I was making it up. I closed my laptop. The plagiarism was real, I said. But it doesn't change why I went looking for it in the first place. We spent the next 4 hours discussing everything. Ethan apologized again, said he had no idea how he'd let himself get twisted like that. He admitted he'd gotten caught up in Olivia's confidence and his own insecurities about not having a PhD. He'd always felt he wasn't smart enough, that his consulting job was somehow inferior to pure research. Olivia had played straight into that fear. She made him feel like he belonged to an elite intellectual club by agreeing with her judgment of me. I listened to it all, trying to figure out if I could forgive someone so quick to dismiss me as incompetent. Part of me knew insecurity makes people do dumb things, but another part couldn't stop thinking about how swiftly he'd turned against me, accepted her story. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I need time to process all of this, to figure out if trust can be re-established after something like this." He nodded, said he understood. He'd wait as long as I needed. We sat there, at opposite ends of the couch. The documentary still paused on the screen. The takeout containers cold between us. I left Ethan's apartment after midnight, hands trembling on the wheel. The conversation replayed in my mind. He'd looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time in months. Back in my apartment, I sat in the dark for an hour, trying to digest it all. The next morning, I texted Ethan. I needed space to think about us. He replied instantly, asking how much time. Honestly, I didn't know. That evening, he arrived at my door with 3 boxes, his face pale and exhausted. He'd packed his belongings from my apartment without asking. His spare work clothes from my closet. His extra toiletries from the bathroom. The book he'd been reading off my nightstand. He moved slowly, cautiously, as if afraid to disturb anything. When he was done, he stood in my doorway, holding the boxes. "Is this what you want?" he asked. "It's what I need right now," I told him. He nodded, left without another word. After he was gone, I wandered through my apartment, noticing the empty spots. The bathroom counter seemed larger without his electric razor. The closet had a gaping space where his coats used to hang. But somehow, the place felt more like mine than it had in months. I realized I'd been sharing it with someone who didn't truly see me. And now, I could breathe again. 3 days later at work, an email from Dr. Fitzgerald popped up. He thanked me for my thorough review of Olivia's study, acknowledging my attention to detail had been essential. Then he said something else. 3 other graduate students had expressed concerns about joint projects with Olivia. Apparently, my review had sparked a much larger investigation into her entire academic career. I sat there, staring at the email. Part of me felt gratified, like I'd unearthed something that needed to be exposed. But another part felt terrible, because I was the one who started it all. Would anyone have found the plagiarism if I hadn't gone looking? If I hadn't been so upset about what she'd done to my relationship, would the other students have spoken up? I closed my inbox, tried to focus, but I couldn't stop thinking about how a single review had derailed someone's entire life. Julia found me at my desk at 7 p.m. on Friday, staring at simulation data I didn't understand. She asked if I wanted to get drinks. Without thinking, I said yes. We ended up at a pub near the lab. Julia asked what was going on. I'd been acting strangely all week. I hadn't intended to tell anyone the whole story. But it all spilled out. Olivia's undermining, Ethan's credulity, discovering the plagiarism, the academic probe, everything. I expected her to be shocked, maybe even critical of what I'd done. Instead, she listened carefully. Then she said, "You didn't manufacture anything. You just highlighted fraud that would have been uncovered eventually." She pointed out that Olivia's behavior towards me was its own form of sabotage, an attempt to ruin both my relationship and my boyfriend's respect for my career. Julia said if the plagiarism was real, Olivia had done it to herself. I had just found it. Hearing someone else say it, it made me feel a little better. The next Tuesday, Ethan called. "Could we talk again?" He'd been thinking a lot about his actions, he explained. He understood the problem wasn't just Olivia. He acknowledged he'd always been intimidated by my practical skills, my hands-on experience. That vulnerability left him open when someone came along and claimed theoretical knowledge was superior. He wanted to discuss it more, if I was willing. I stared at the text for an hour. Part of me wanted to just dismiss it, move on. But another part, I needed to know how we got here. I agreed to meet him for coffee on Saturday. He was already there, at a corner table, with a notepad. After we ordered, he slid it across to me. It was a list. Every single time he'd questioned my intelligence or ability over the last 7 months. More examples than I'd even remembered. Times he'd asked if I was certain about something technical, double-checked my work, conversations where he'd explained things I already understood. Some seemed so small at the time, but seeing them all written down, together, revealed a pattern that had started long before Olivia arrived. She hadn't caused it. She'd just made it worse. I read through the entire list, feeling the anguish and rage rise again. Ethan watched me, silent, until I finished. Then he asked, "Do you think we can fix this? Or is the damage too severe?" We spent the next 4 hours dissecting the foundation of our relationship, whether it had ever been as strong as I'd imagined. Ethan confessed his deep insecurities about not having a PhD, doing consulting instead of research. He'd always worried he wasn't as intelligent as those in theoretical fields. Olivia's talk of esoteric concepts, quantum physics, made him feel like part of an intellectual club. Agreeing with her assessment of me was his way of proving he belonged there. I told him that was a terrible reason to undervalue someone he supposedly loved. He agreed. He understood it was wrong. He wanted to focus on trusting his own experiences with people, rather than just believing whoever sounded the most confident or had the most credentials. I questioned if he truly believed he could change that tendency. It seemed so deeply ingrained. He said he didn't know, but he wanted to try, if I was willing to give him the chance. I told him I needed more time to consider if I could ever truly trust him again. Whether the fact that he was so quickly convinced I was inept was something I could overcome. We left the coffee shop without making a decision about our future. That week, I kept reflecting. I needed an outside opinion, from someone who knew the professional aspect of what I'd done. I emailed Michael Jacobs, a former graduate school lecturer I'd stayed in touch with. I outlined the situation, how I discovered Olivia's plagiarism while assessing her work for Dr. Fitzgerald. I asked about the ethics involved. Michael called me the next day. He listened to the entire story. Then he said something that astonished me. Exposing academic fraud, he stressed, was an ethical responsibility for anyone who detected it. Regardless of my personal motives for scrutinizing Olivia's work, discovering and reporting plagiarism was the correct thing to do. The academic system, he said, relies on honesty. If I had found the scam and not reported it, that would have been an ethical issue. My reasons for looking didn't change the reality that what I found was true and needed to be addressed. Talking to Michael made me feel less awful about the whole thing. 2 weeks after Ethan moved out, I got an email that made my stomach drop. It was from Olivia. The subject line, "I know it was you." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. Her email wasn't furious, as I'd feared. Instead, it was dejected. Melancholy. She'd figured out my connection to Dr. Fitzgerald, probably by sifting through his emails after everything fell apart. She knew I was the one who reviewed her work, found all the errors. Then she said something that truly shocked me. She said the plagiarism was true. She'd convinced herself the parallels to the Russian articles were accidental, that the concepts just seemed obvious to her. But when all 15 cases were laid out, she couldn't deny it. She'd gotten lazy, sloppy, taken shortcuts because she was behind schedule. She knew it was wrong, but she'd rationalized it away. The email ended with her stating she didn't blame me for reporting it, because it was the truth. I read that email 3 times, trying to gauge how I felt. Part of me had expected anger, accusations. Her acceptance, her acknowledgement of her own deceit, was harder to process. I didn't reply to Olivia, but I forwarded it to Ethan. He needed to see that his friend was not only a fraud, but someone who had deliberately tried to destroy our relationship. He called me 10 minutes after I sent it, his voice trembling. He started apologizing, said he saw what had happened now, that Olivia had exploited him while being intellectually dishonest the whole time. He felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, for trusting her over me. I told him I appreciated his apology, but I still didn't understand what it meant for us. We spent another hour talking. At the end, Ethan asked if I wanted to try couples counseling. He understood, he said, that we had serious trust and communication issues he couldn't resolve on his own. That if we were going to save our relationship, we needed professional help. I was shocked he suggested it. Ethan had always been wary of therapy. But I decided to try. I wasn't ready to give up on us. We started seeing a therapist the next week. The first session felt awkward, uncomfortable. We sat on opposite ends of a beige couch, trying to explain what brought us there. The therapist asked questions about our history, about Olivia. Over the following sessions, she helped us identify patterns we'd both missed. She pointed out that Ethan's anxiety about his education and career had led him to overvalue theoretical knowledge, academic credentials, while undervaluing actual experience. That dynamic had left our relationship vulnerable to someone like Olivia, who presented herself as intellectually superior. The therapist also helped me reflect on my own actions, how I chose retribution over confronting the matter openly, how I contributed to Olivia's impression of me as less intellectual by not standing up for myself earlier. We both needed to focus on communication and trust if we wanted to rebuild anything meaningful. Ethan started addressing his insecurity, learning to respect diverse forms of intellect and skill. I focused on being more open about my emotions, rather than letting bitterness fester until I lashed out. It was a painstaking process. Some sessions were incredibly difficult, with both of us getting defensive or upset. But slowly, things began to improve between us. 3 months passed. Things with Ethan improved, but they changed. We communicated more about how we felt, instead of assuming. When I was hurt by something he said, I told him immediately. When he felt uneasy about his career or our relationship, he expressed it directly. But there was a new level of caution between us, a slight hesitation, as if we were both looking for signs that the other person might mistrust us again. I'd find myself occasionally waiting to see if he'd dispute a decision I made. And I could see him doing the same. It wasn't necessarily bad. Just different from the easy trust we used to share. We were building something more honest, but it required more effort, more focus. One Tuesday afternoon, my boss called me into her office. I braced myself, sure I'd messed up a satellite component test. Instead, she told me I was being promoted to senior engineer. The role came with a significant raise and my own team to oversee the next generation navigation systems project. I sat there, stunned. I'd been so absorbed with Ethan and Olivia, I hadn't even realized the promotion cycle was underway. My boss said it was an easy decision. My published research and technical contributions over the past year had been superb. I thanked her, walked back to my desk, feeling a strange mix of pride and relief. That night, when I told Ethan, he instantly hugged me, told me how proud he was. He insisted on throwing a celebratory dinner that weekend, inviting our friends and some of his coworkers. At the dinner, he started telling people about my research papers and technical knowledge, without me prompting him. He highlighted specific projects I'd worked on, explained their significance. It felt like a test we were both passing. Him, demonstrating his appreciation for my efforts. Me, allowing him to celebrate my accomplishment without questioning his motives. A few weeks later, Julia approached me at work during lunch, a somber expression on her face. She'd heard something about Olivia through academic networks. Olivia had dropped out of the PhD program entirely, not just taken a break. She'd moved back to her hometown in Ohio to work for her family's commercial real estate firm. Julia thought I should know. When I heard the news, a confused knot tightened in my gut. Part of me felt relieved. Olivia had suffered serious repercussions for her deceit and for trying to sabotage my relationship. She'd been exposed as a fraud, lost the career she'd been so proud of. But another part of me felt uneasy with how completely her life had fallen apart. I had found actual plagiarism and poor research. That was true. But I'd done it with the intention of hurting her because of what she'd done to me. The magnitude of her collapse, losing everything she'd worked for, having to quit academia altogether, it felt heavier than I'd anticipated. I thanked Julia for telling me, went back to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. Ethan and I discussed Olivia's situation that weekend. I told him what Julia had said, admitting to feeling awkward about it. He reiterated why I'd done what I did, and how Olivia had brought the consequences on herself through her own dishonesty. But he also understood I was probably conflicted, being the one who started it. We agreed to keep working on our relationship, to stay together, to continue therapy, to build something more honest than what we had before. What happened had affected both of us deeply. I realized then that I was capable of premeditated retribution, of plotting and carrying out someone's demise in a very intentional way. It was an unsettling realization about myself. Ethan, on the other hand, was now aware he was capable of betraying someone he loved, not through purposeful malice, but through weakness, insecurity, and allowing others to distort his perceptions. We were building something more authentic than the comfortable rhythm we used to share. It was harder work, less comfortable, but it felt more solid. As if we understood who we truly were now, flaws and all, and still chose each other. Yet, despite our flaws and capacity to damage each other, the fatigue was still present. But there was also something deeper. So, after all of this, what do you think? Was I justified in what I did? Or did I go too far? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.